Ambassador Chen Wei adjusted her ceremonial robes as she entered the grand chamber of the Galactic Council for what would be her final address. The massive crystalline dome above filtered starlight from a dozen systems, casting prismatic shadows across the assembled delegates. Representatives from the Zephyrian Empire floated in their bioluminescent pods, while the Silicon Collective's geometric forms hummed with electronic discourse. The Vorthon delegation sat rigidly in their environmental suits, and dozens of other species filled the amphitheater with a cacophony of alien languages. At the center podium, Chancellor Xerion of the Zephyrians called for order with a melodic trill that resonated through the chamber's acoustics. His translucent form pulsed with what Chen had learned to recognize as amusement. "We gather today," Xerion announced, "to bid farewell to the human delegation whose species has chosen to withdraw from galactic civilization. Ambassador Chen, the floor is yours for your final remarks." Chen stood, her modest height dwarfed by the towering alien architecture around her. She had represented humanity for 15 years, watching as every proposal for human legal frameworks was dismissed with barely concealed mockery. The concepts of individual rights, due process, and presumption of innocence were seen as quaint barbarisms by species that had evolved past such primitive notions. "Honored delegates," Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "When humanity first joined this council, we offered our legal traditions as a contribution to galactic civilization. You found them amusing." A ripple of harmonized chuckles echoed from the Zephyrian pods. The Vorthon's mechanical clicks indicated their equivalent of laughter. "The right to legal representation," Chen continued, "was called inefficient by the collective. The concept of appeals processes was deemed wasteful by the Empire. Our insistence on evidence-based judgments was labeled overthinking by the hegemony." Delegate Cross of the Vorthon Military Tribunal spoke up. His voice filtered through atmospheric processors. "Human Chen, your species' obsession with individual protections is indeed primitive. Justice should be swift, absolute, and serve the greater order. Why complicate what advanced civilizations have perfected?" "Because," Chen replied softly, "perfection is often indistinguishable from tyranny." Before anyone could respond, an urgent alarm pierced the chamber. Emergency lights bathed the assembly in red as Chancellor Xerion received a priority transmission. His bioluminescence flickered rapidly as he processed the information. "Delegates," Xerion's voice had lost all trace of amusement, "we have a crisis. The Devourers have returned." A collective shudder ran through the chamber. The Devourers were an ancient machine intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy millennia ago, before mysteriously vanishing. Their return meant only one thing: total war. "More critically," Xerion continued, "they have captured Admiral Thex of the Vorthon Fleet, Commander Zilla of the Collective, and Supreme Chancellor Vex of the Trade Federation. They demand a trial." The chamber erupted in confusion. Delegate Cross rose to his feet, his exoskeleton grinding with tension. "Impossible. The Devourers do not take prisoners. They consume or destroy. Yet here we are," Xerion replied grimly. "They claim these leaders committed war crimes during the Purge Wars 3,000 years ago. They demand a formal legal proceeding according to established galactic law before they will release the prisoners or negotiate any peace." Chen felt a chill run down her spine as the implications became clear. "What established galactic law are they referring to?" Xerion's form dimmed with what she recognized as embarrassment. "According to their broadcast, they acknowledge only one formal legal framework currently recognized by this council as having universal jurisdiction: the human legal protocols." The silence that followed was deafening. For 3,000 years, the galaxy had operated on the principle of might making right. The stronger species imposed their will through economic, military, or technological superiority. Justice was whatever the victors decided it was. "But that's impossible," stammered Representative Krill of the Trade Federation. "The human protocols were never formally adopted." "Actually," Chen said quietly, pulling up her archived files, "they were. Resolution 847B passed 14 years ago. The Council voted to acknowledge and archive human legal frameworks for historical purposes. The exact wording was, recognized as a valid legal framework for any species choosing to adopt such measures." The memory crystals confirmed her words. In their arrogance, the council had patronizingly recognized human law without ever imagining it would matter. Delegate Cross's mechanical voice cracked with desperation. Then invoke your laws. Demand the immediate release of our leaders. Chen shook her head sadly. That's not how it works. If the Devourers are truly invoking human legal protocols, then your leaders are entitled to due process. That means investigation, evidence gathering, legal representation, and a fair trial. How long will this take? Zarian's light pulsed frantically. Months, possibly years, depending on the complexity of the charges and evidence. The chamber exploded in outrage. Species that had perfected swift, decisive justice now faced the prospect of their leaders held captive during a prolonged legal process they had spent decades mocking. This is exactly why your system is flawed, shouted Representative Krill. Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice rushed is justice corrupted, Chen replied calmly. Your species have enjoyed 3 millennia of unchecked power because you never had to answer for your actions. Now you do. In the hours that followed, as the reality of their situation sank in, the once proud species of the Galactic Council found themselves desperately studying human legal texts. The same laws they had dismissed as primitive barbarism were now their only hope for recovering their leaders and avoiding annihilation. Chen spent her final days before humanity's exodus, establishing the legal framework for the trials. She trained teams of alien lawyers in concepts of burden of proof, cross-examination, and judicial review. Species that had never needed to justify their actions now scrambled to understand the intricate dance of evidence and argument that humans had perfected over millennia. As her transport prepared to leave for the last time, Chancellor Zarion approached her personally, his bioluminescence subdued with humility. Ambassador Chen, he said quietly, we have spent years mocking your people's dedication to legal principles. We called you primitive for caring about individual rights and fair process. Perhaps we were wrong. Chen smiled sadly. You weren't wrong about one thing, Chancellor. Our laws are indeed ancient and primitive, but so is the concept of justice itself. Sometimes the old ways endure because they work. 6 months later, news reached the human colonies that the trials had concluded. The evidence against the ancient leaders was overwhelming, and they were found guilty under human legal standards. But because those same standards required proportional punishment and rehabilitation over revenge, the sentences focused on reparations and reform rather than execution. The Devourers, satisfied that justice had been served through proper legal channels, withdrew once again to their distant realm. The galaxy was saved not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the stubborn human insistence that everyone, even the powerful, deserved a fair trial. And in the great archives of the Galactic Council, the human legal protocols were quietly moved from the historical curiosities section to active galactic law. Sometimes the most advanced civilizations needed to learn from the most primitive wisdom. True strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to judge fairly.